staff. We're thrilled to have Bob Catell with us today. Just as we start, I want to mention if you came in late, there are plenty of seats kind of over here, and also there's lunch for anybody who wants it. Just so that Mr. Catell can have a kind of a lay of the land of who's in the room, who here is a major in the social sciences? Economics, business, psychology, sociology. Put your hands up if you're in the social sciences, just so we have a sense. Okay, how many of you are majoring in engineering? Wow, so overwhelming. So when President Boudreau says you're dean, really I'm not your dean, but we're glad that you're here. How many of you are science students? All right, thank you for being here. And something other than social science, engineering, and science. Okay, and what are you?
Department of Arts and Humanities.
Arts. Okay, great. English. International Studies. That is Colin Powell social science, so we're glad. And architecture. Okay, so a really nice cross-section of folks.
Really?
Continuing in professional studies.
Oh, good, and continuing professional studies. All right, and then my other question is, how many of you know about or maybe applied for the Bloom Energy Fellowship program?
Yeah.
A big number of you. Okay, great.
Very interesting.
And any of you are climate and policy fellows? A few of you. All right, so now we have the lay of the land.
Wow.
So a lot of interest in exactly the issues we're here to talk about. We thought we'd take a little time to get to know Mr. Catell, learn about his life and his career, and then have asked him to share advice for all of you who are thinking about careers in the climate, energy, sustainability fields. So can I ask you to go back to your childhood? I know you grew up in Brooklyn. And just tell the story of growing up in Brooklyn and your pathway as a child all the way to the point that you got to City College.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's really a pleasure for me to be here. How did I start? Well, I grew up in Brooklyn. And at that time, Brooklyn, as it is today, was a very large borough, not quite as diverse as it is today. And I was actually raised by a single parent, my mother. I went to what we used to refer to in those days. I grew up in the section I grew up today. It's called Sunset Park. It wasn't called Sunset Park when I grew up there. Some people call it South Brooklyn. It doesn't really matter. But I went to New Utrecht High School in Brooklyn. And in those days, it was referred to, I don't know whether they do it still today, as an academic high school, as opposed to the Brooklyn Techs, the Stuyvesants, which are much more science-oriented. And when I was going to high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I, quote, grew up. And I'm not sure I still know, but I thought I wanted to be an engineer. But I really didn't know what engineers did. I didn't have a clue. So my college advisor, she advised me not to go into engineering. And she said, and I should back up a little bit, I was fortunate. I had gotten accepted to City College. I couldn't have gone to college otherwise. When I went to City College, it was actually tuition free, if you can remember. I go back that far. So I could not have gone to college. My mother worked and raised my sister and I, but I was fortunate to get accepted into City College, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So my college advisor said to me, I said I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and she said, you won't make it in engineering because you don't have enough math and sciences in high school, and you would be competing with young people that went to like Stuyvesant and Brooklyn Tech. So I actually started in City College at that time they called it liberal arts. I don't know, do they still have a school of liberal arts here? Probably don't call it that anymore.
Yes.
Okay, and actually that worked out to be very fortuitous for me because I took courses in the School of Liberal Arts that I would have never taken in engineering. I had an arts course, I had a music course, I had a speech course. So I was here for about a year, and in those days, engineers used something called slide rules. You don't see that anymore, but that's how you do. And I saw these engineers walking around with slide rules. I said, I want to be an engineer. So I went to the dean of the engineering school, Dean Allen, I'll never forget, and I said, I want to transfer from liberal arts to engineering. And he said, well, most students don't do that. A lot of them go the other way from engineering to liberal arts. I said, well, I want to do it. He said, well, we have to put you on probation. So they put me on probation. And in those days, you got A's, B's, and C's as your grades. I think it's different today. And I had to maintain a C plus something average. And I'll never forget the first physics course that I went to. I'd never had physics in high school. And it was true what my high school advisor had told me. The kids from Stuyvesant and Brooklyn Tech, they knew what lasers were. I had no idea what vectors were. Anyway, long story short, and I'll cut it off here, I passed the course. I got a D, but I got some B's, so I maintained. I was on probation for a year, And I eventually graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. It took me 5 years to get the degree because of the year I had in liberal arts. But again, I think I benefited tremendously from that. Then when I graduated from City College, I went to work for AT&T. The reason I went to work for AT&T is because I had a summer job there, so they hired me. And when I was graduating from City College, it was all about getting a job. At that point, my mother had become ill. My sister, who was 7 years younger than me, couldn't work, so I was actually supporting my mother and sister. So it was all about getting a job. My salary was, I think, about $100 a week at the time, but I needed a job. And I went to work to AT&T. Was there for about 6 months, and then I saw an ad in the paper for a little gas company in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Union Gas Company. Got interviewed, hired, spent 50 years there. And after 33 years there, I became CEO. And that was, and as President Boudreaux mentioned, Brooklyn Union became KeySpan. KeySpan was acquired by National Grid, and I was the chairman for a while and retired in 2009.
So let me go back. When you were thinking about college, growing up in Brooklyn, where besides City College did you look at?
Well, it's an interesting question. I looked at a lot of places. I would have loved to have gone away to college and have the experience of going away to college, but I couldn't afford it. I mean, so I looked at CUNY, and I looked at City College, but I also looked at that time it was Brook. I guess it's still Brook. And I did look at SUNY, but I lived in Brooklyn, so going out to Long Island and places like that was really not an option to me. So it was almost exclusively going to City College. And again, as I mentioned, at that time it was tuition free.
Yeah.
I used to pay, I think, $12.50 for some kind of a card, and I had to buy my books.
Yeah.
But so it was really, and the other thing was I needed to work. So when I went to City College, I used to get early classes, used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get up here for an 8 o'clock class from Brooklyn. And I worked in the afternoons, so I was doing that at the same time.
Yeah, that's why I wanted them to have a sense of kind of your experience as a student, which I don't think is that different from a lot of their experiences as a student. When I read an interview that you did about that first job you had at AT&T, and I wonder if and that you could have stayed at AT&T, but you sized up the size of AT&T and realized maybe that wasn't the place for growth for you. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, the good news was that when I was graduated, I got offered a job. And actually, I do remember the salary. It was $450 a month. That was my salary at that time, which I'm going back in the late 50s, early 60s. It wasn't terrible. And the other thing about AT&T was it was a large corporation. At that time, it was before the telephone companies were broken up. So there were like 450,000 employees in AT&T, and I was a junior engineer, and my job was I was testing circuits, long-distance circuits, in a basement of a building in Manhattan, and that wasn't something I wanted to do for too long. So I just didn't really think in a company of that size that there would be much of an opportunity for me. So when I saw the ad for Brooklyn Union Gas, which only had 3,000 employees, served gas in the boroughs of Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, I thought there might be a better opportunity for me in a company like that.
You went over to Brooklyn Gas, and you, as you just said, you stuck with them for 50 years. Nobody does that these days, and most people at least can't anticipate that they could have a career at one company. I wonder if you might speak to kind of what that experience was like and how. Yeah.
I'll make a couple of comments about that. I will talk about what that experience.
Yeah.
But as the dean knows, I have a number of grandchildren growing up, and they ask me about their career opportunities and what they should do. And it's, I think, a little more challenging today for young people like you to decide what you want to do. But I don't advise them to go to one company and stay there for 50 years. I think it's good earlier in your career if you can move around a little bit and get varied experiences before you decide really what you want to do for the rest of your life. I was fortunate enough, I got hired at Brooklyn Union as a junior engineer. And my first job was in what they called the meter repair shop. I wasn't repairing meters, but there were people that were working on meters. Then I went out and was actually supervising the installation of pipes in the ground in the street. But fortunately for me, I had the opportunity to move around in the company. So I started in engineering, I eventually got into marketing, I got into government relations. So even though it was at one company, I had a lot of varied experiences in that company as I sort of moved up the line. So it gave me an experience to experience a lot about a single company, which young people today, I think, would be better off to maybe experience that in a number of different companies. Unless, and one of the things today, young people are much more, in my opinion, much more entrepreneurial. I hear a lot of young people want to start their own businesses, and that's another direction to go in. But for me, Brooklyn Union offered a lot of different opportunities. For some reason, people thought I was worthy of getting promoted, and eventually became CEO.
Can you say a bit about how you make those transitions in a career, particularly within a single organization? You know, you came in as an engineer, you ended up as the CEO. One wouldn't assume you started with the skill sets necessary, and you mentioned moving across different units. How do you navigate that?
Well, in Brooklyn Union, at the time I went there, we didn't have in those, you know, today everything is on the computer. So if you're in a company, they post for jobs. We didn't have that facility in those days. So it really, for me, was getting to, I use the term networking, getting to know people in the company, getting to talk to people in other areas of the company. And when there were opportunities that I became aware of, I would apply for those jobs. Didn't get everyone that I applied for, but through getting to know different people, different areas of the company, I got a pretty good feeling for what was going on. And as opportunities presented themselves, people would come and tell me that there's an opening in the marketing department, and then I would apply for that. And you'd have to be interviewed, and as I said, I didn't get them all. You have to learn how to deal with disappointment as well. You get some of that. But it was really through, I guess, if you want to use the term networking, getting to know people, getting to know different areas of the company. And as I moved up the ladder, so to speak, I had a pretty good broad knowledge of most of the areas of the company. So I think it put me in a better position for when I eventually became CEO.
So Mr. Catell started at Brooklyn Gas, right?
Right.
And so a gas company, and then you played a key role in some sense the transformation of what was a gas company into an energy company. And I wonder if you could speak about that kind of substantive transition and what it meant for you to be at the early stages of a new energy company.
Well, the gas company, as we refer to it affectionately, Brooklyn Union Gas, was strictly in the business of distributing gas in the boroughs of Brooklyn, Queens, and Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. That was what we called our territory. And utilities, and I think it's still today, although the business is very different today, you have a territory, it's called a franchise area, and you are, at that time, we were actually a monopoly. So if anybody wanted to buy gas in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, the only company they could buy it from was Brooklyn Union. Not the same today. But as I looked at the energy industry, and at the time I was in it, natural gas was primarily being used to displace oil. And the reason that it was being used to displace oil is because it was more environmentally cleaner. So at that time, we weren't moving away, we were really using a lot of fossil fuels. And we got to the point where we actually had 80% of the market in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. So we pretty much had a saturated market. So as I looked and as I saw the energy industry changing, I felt it was important for the company, even though we were a regulated public utility, to look at other areas of opportunity, primarily focusing on the customer. What other things could we provide the customer? What other services could we provide the customer that would be, kind of close to our business, but kind of broaden? So we started a number of subsidiary companies in the energy services business. We then got into, I had a vision at one point, which didn't really work out, that a company like a Brooklyn Union Gas needed to go from the wellhead to the burner tip. Now, what did I mean by that? It means we would be in exploration, we'd be in pipelines, and we would then be in gas distribution. As it turned out, that really didn't work because the market, as they looked at a company like Brooklyn Union, we were a regulated utility, and they didn't really want, I say the market, I'm talking about the stock market, people who invest in utilities. They really didn't want to invest in exploration because that was too risky. They didn't want to necessarily be in pipelines. They looked at us as being a gas distribution company. The other thing I saw as the industry was changing, that there was the beginning. It was early stage. Well, a couple of things happened. The regulation changed where customers could now have other choices. So we now had to sort of change our culture from being a very highly regulated monopoly into a much more customer-focused, competitive company. And as I looked at that, and I also saw the industry changing, evolving, I thought it was important that we start to get into other businesses. Now, it's always challenging when you go from being a highly regulated monopoly into a competitive company because it requires a change of culture. So you have to do a number of things. You have to try to get the employees in the company understand that the company's changing, and you also have to bring people in from outside. You have to kind of change the dynamics in the company. So we started to do that. And then in 1998, we actually expanded our operations out to Long Island because we had all the market we could do in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. We saw an opportunity, so we acquired the gas properties of the Long Island Lighting Company, and then we also got into the electric business. So we're now transitioning from a straight gas company to a company that was in both gas and electric. And then we eventually acquired some properties up in Boston, became the largest gas distribution company in the Northeast, and in 2007, a company called National Grid wanted to buy some U.S. properties, and they acquired KeySpan.
How did you, as the leader of the business at various stages, how did you anticipate the trends in the market, anticipate the changes in the regulation, and kind of position the company to grow and to succeed? How do you
Yeah. Well, I think a little bit of that goes to some of the things that President Boudreau mentioned. I've always been very much a person that got involved in a lot of things, I guess if you want to call it that way. So while I hadn't yet become president, even before I became president of Brooklyn Union, I got involved in a lot of industry associations, went to a lot of meetings, did a lot of reading. So I became aware of the fact that the energy industry was starting to go through a transition. One, we were becoming a more competitive industry, being utility, and we also saw the shift away from fossil fuels starting into more renewables. So I saw those trends, and it was really, I guess, mostly by association, by getting involved, by talking to people outside the industry, doing a lot of reading, and just becoming aware of what's going on around in the industry. So it was that. I also had the benefit, as I was, I guess, if you want to call it progressing in my jobs, to get to know people like General Powell and making those kind of associations. I should mention at this point also, President Boudreau alluded to it, I also felt it was important, and maybe we're going to get to this a little bit later, as I was involved in industry and had the ability to get involved in the community and to give back to the community, that was as important as whatever professional gratification I was getting. Now I was in a position to give back and to help people in the community who were perhaps not as fortunate as I was. So that became part of my, I guess, growing as a person.
Can you speak about what you did on those fronts? Both, and I see at least two categories. One is what you did as an individual, which I think they'd love to learn about. And two, how you operated as a CEO. And I've read a lot about what you did in the transformation of Brooklyn in particular. And I wonder if you might speak to that.
Okay. Well, I think with me, and again, President Boudreau mentioned it, with me it's all about education. It started by me having the benefit of getting a great education up here at City College. Put in a plug for City College because I believe in it. So I always felt as I got to the point where I was able to be helpful that it would be to help young people and focus on education. And that's why, as was mentioned, I was on the advisory board of the engineering school here at City College going way back. So I really looked at being able to help young people get a good education was something that I wanted to do. Because that's really, if you think about how I was able to achieve what I achieved, it started with having a great education. But that, as a corporate entity, I also felt it was important to help other organizations in the community that were helping the community. I always felt that a public utility in particular had a responsibility for supporting the community, because this community. So I got involved, as the dean alluded to economic development in Brooklyn, working with the elected officials. And if you go back to Brooklyn back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was not in a very good place. The neighborhoods were deteriorating, and it went through a major transformation. If you go to downtown Brooklyn today, it looks very different from what it did 30 years ago. So again, I felt, particularly being a utility, particularly having a responsibility to give back, that it was important to get involved in the community, both supporting education, supporting businesses, I mean, it starts with education, then it's businesses because people need to have jobs. So it was all of that. It was just, I guess, being in a spot where I could do that and be feeling that it was important to give back for what I was able to achieve. So we got involved in the, again, President Boudreau mentioned the New York City partnership. We also developed the Downtown Brooklyn partnership to work on economic development in the area, working with the companies. Not so much startup companies in those days. These were mostly companies that were established that maybe weren't doing so well and they needed some help. So it started with education, supporting education, getting involved in economic development, and also other institutions in the community which are helping people that need some help.
So the energy field. A lot of folks in the room are interested in building careers in that space. How would you characterize its evolution in the time that you've been in it and where we are today?
Well, as you know, I've spent my entire career in the energy field. When I retired from National Grid, I spent a couple of years there as their corporate U.S. chairman. I actually connected out. I've always maintained a close connection to City College and what was going on here. But I also connected out with Stony Brook University, and I now chair an energy research center, which was formed about 15 years ago. And its purpose, as the energy industry was evolving, was to develop new technologies in the clean energy space, which could be commercialized and create businesses and jobs. So it gave me an opportunity to kind of transition, as I call it, from starting as a fossil fuel guy to now being involved in renewable energy. And as you look at the energy field, and some of you are involved in it, it is all about sustainability. It's all about transitioning from fossil fuels to cleaner fuels, to renewable energy. And to me, that presents a tremendous opportunity. It's going to require new technologies to do it. These are things that we're looking at the Energy Center, things that they're doing in the Research Center right here at City College. So it has been an interesting transition for me to go from dependent on fossil fuels to now looking at renewables. And how do you incorporate renewables into the energy mix as we try to move to, net zero? You probably hear the term net zero. It's all about looking things from an environmental standpoint. We all want to clean up the environment. We all want to be more sustainable. We know that not only are fossil fuels bad for the environment, they're not going to be here forever. So you want to make that transition from fossil fuels to renewable energies and all of the technologies that are going to be required to be able to do that. That's kind of what excites me. As you know, we're looking at wind. I can talk about offshore wind if you want to talk about it, but the wind doesn't blow all the time. So when the wind's not blowing, you have to have alternatives. So, of course, you want to keep the lights on. Again, President Boudreau mentioned reliability, critically important, and affordability. That's the other part of it. You also want to make sure that everyone are getting the benefits of cleaner, affordable energy. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but it's all of those things which excite me now, as I'm a little bit older than most of you. But as I look at the future of the energy industry and the opportunities there in all of these fields, I think it's tremendous. I almost wish I could be starting all over again. I'm not sure I would want to do it all over again, but I think the opportunity in the energy industry is just limitless right now.
That's great. So it's an exciting moment to be young and entering this space. What would your advice be? If you're going to give 2 or 3 pieces of advice for folks who are just starting out, how to prepare themselves, things to have on their minds, what would it be?
Well, I think, it starts right here at City College by getting a good education. And that's kind of jacks for openers to have a college degree. And all of you have already kind of decided the fields that you want to be in to some degree. It doesn't mean that that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. But I give this advice to my grandkids who are going. I think it's important, obviously, to have a good education, which you're getting here, but then try to find a field, one that's rewarding, that's satisfying, but also something that you kind of like to do, that you have an interest in, and I think it's very important. I think you have a better opportunity to be successful if you're doing something you like, obviously. I've spoken to people over the years, and people tell me that they don't like going to work. They hate their jobs. I can't imagine that. So, focus on the field that you're in, get that educational background, and then as you look to get a job, throw a wide net. Try to be as expansive as you can. Obviously, you have a field that you want to get into, but and the first job is always the toughest to get that first job because you always want to know how much experience you've had. Well, I've just got out of college and I have experience. Don't get discouraged. I didn't always succeed in everything that I did either, but you gotta be able to stick to it. So kind of cast a wide net, look around, look at the opportunities, but bottom line, try to find something that you really enjoy doing, because I think you have the greatest chance of success if it's something that you like to do.